So, it's the end of the season for Strange New Worlds, but it's back to the start. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review. I'm going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Episode 10. So if you haven't seen it, this is going to contain absolutely massive spoilers. So this episode is all about Pike's fate, and is it just me or does Pike's fate sound like an Irish bar in Boston somewhere? And if you haven't seen any of the trailers or the teasers for this episode, man, this is going to shock you. I avoided them myself. But I'm sort of conflicted about this episode. I really liked it, but it does really lean into the rumours that this show is going to end up being a TOS reboot, and I'll get to that in a minute. So what's going on is the ship's on the edge of the neutral zone, and we know that we're going to be getting Romulans because of that, and Pike's hooked back up with Captain Patel from episode 1. And originally I wasn't really sure where this episode was going to go with the Romulans. I clicked on pretty quickly it was going to get tied into Balance of Terror. But yeah, this episode starts off, and let's say if you haven't seen the teasers and you aren't aware of the plot, you sort of don't know what's going on with the Romulans. Pike refers to them as the Boogeyman, and I like that this episode is finally about Pike's fate. I'd kind of forgotten about it because the first episode they did lean into it so heavily, and we got a few mentions of it throughout the season, but they didn't go as heavy as I thought, which is actually a good thing. So anyway, he's got to go to one of these outposts and he encounters one of the cadets that's going to be involved in the accident in about 10 years' time. And his dad is commander of this base that the Enterprise is there to help out. So I was thinking he could just do a Terminator and kill the kid right there and then. And no, it's not going to happen because it's Star Trek. But yeah, Anson Mount, like, this is definitely his episode. I don't think he's really shone as strong in this season as he has in Discovery Season 2. But he played this episode in this scene so well. So it sort of starts off that he's going to do the opposite and try and save the kid, hoping that that will in turn save himself. But before it can get too deep into that, we get an older Pike showing up from the future, and he's got the red sort of Star Trek 2 Rafakan, you know, the Star Trek films uniform on, and I love it. I forgot how great these uniforms look on screen. So Admiral Pike's travelled back to warn Captain Pike about warning the kid, so it's a double warning episode. And he's been running away from his fate only to be confronted by himself, I suppose. And he wants to show him about the changes that have been made in the timeline, or the changes that could be made with the decision that's hanging over his head at the moment. But he doesn't actually say what the outcome of these changes are to the end of the episode. And I think it's kind of pretty clear, so he could have gone into a little bit more depth. He does come back to it. So yeah, it's a Pike Wonderful Life episode, and he's doing some quantum leaping into the start of Balance of Terror, where Kirk is doing the wedding. So he's jumped about 7 years into the future, and man, has the tone on the Enterprise changed. When he gets to the bridge, Uhura and Ortega just feel like cardboard. Like, there's just nothing going on here. So at this point in the Star Trek timeline, Kirk should be in charge of the Enterprise and in the big chair, and Pike needs to do his job while keeping the timeline straight and narrow, and done what Kirk would have done, I suppose. So it is just a retelling, or a sort of other side of the coin of Balance of Terror. But are you convinced this show isn't going to lead to a TOS reboot yet? I don't know, man. I'm totally 50-50 on that. And why didn't older Pike just tell himself what was going to happen? They go heavily into the TOS vibes. The music, the lighting, maybe the lighting a little bit too much, but the music is absolutely brilliant. I can understand why people are going to criticise this episode as not being that creative, but when you watch TOS, even the remastered ones, they still don't look that great. So seeing this battle played out with the sort of modern sets and modern technology and the modern CGI, I did like that, but I can understand why some people might think it was a bit weak in the storytelling department. But yeah, Balance of Terror was season 1, I think it was episode 14, so Kirk would have been in the chair for quite a while at this point. But what does that mean for Kirk in the TOS show? Is that before this point in history, anything that he'd done didn't really matter? And I'm going to get back to Kirk in a moment. So, because it's Balance of Terror, the Romulans show up and cause the biggest console explosion in history. And again, the Enterprise crew have just got no joy in them whatsoever. What changed the vibe on this ship? What did Pike do to change the mood? And I bet you didn't even notice that number one isn't even in this timeline. This show just can't seem to wait to get rid of her. And man, am I going to get to that at the end of the episode. I've spoke about him and we knew we were going to get him, and I thought he was going to show up at the end of the season. And yeah, Kirk is here. And this is a lot sooner and a lot bigger than I expected. So what about the new Kirk? Look, that deserves a video on its own, but he's definitely not Shatner and he's definitely not Pine. And there's a scene I'm going to talk about in a moment where Pike sort of talks to Sam Kirk about what his brother's like, because Pike isn't particularly sure and doesn't trust him. But one thing that doesn't make sense is if everything was the same sort of up until this point, years beforehand, Kirk would have passed the Kobayashi Maru test. So why hasn't Pike heard of the cadet that done that? So he gets Sam to talk some shit about him, and Sam sort of describes Kirk roughly the way that he is. He's a rule breaker, he's charismatic, he always does what he thinks the right thing is going to be at the end of the day. And the problem is, the new Captain Kirk that we get isn't charismatic or a rule breaker or any of the things that we associate with Captain Kirk, let alone the ones that are mentioned in this episode. Although this is the first portrayal we've seen him in Strange New Worlds, it doesn't inspire me with hope. The performance is very flat, and I understand not leaning into doing an impersonation of William Shatner, but there is no tones of Shatner in this performance at all. Kirk is just not here, and I don't know who this captain is, because if you go back and you watch Balance of Terror, and I've done that after watching this episode, there is nothing of that Captain Kirk in this Captain Kirk. So the other big reveal from Balance of Terror is they find out that the Romulans look like the Vulcans, at least from what they can see. And the big debate here is Kirk wants to attack and Pike wants to wait a while and sort of talk it out and play it out and see what's going to happen. And Spock sides with Kirk and Pike isn't too sure. Now, one thing I did like about this episode is they didn't sort of play it for laughs that Spock was a child having to choose between mum and dad. They could have done that so easily, and I'm surprised actually that they didn't lean into it, because they didn't touch it at all. But yeah, the dynamic between Kirk, Spock and Pike, they're all sort of left to do their own thing, and again, this Spock is so flat compared to the one that we've got in the rest of the season. It's almost like a Mirror Universe episode. It felt like that a few times. So they come up with a plan to track the Romulans' course and intercept them when they're cloaked. But the whole plan depends on the fact that the Romulans are travelling in a straight line in space, you know, is maybe the most three-dimensional thing ever. So they'll see them through the cloak once they get to the back of a passing comet, again assuming that they're going in a straight line, and the Romulans can't detect them when they're cloaked as well, which I thought, if you can't really detect anything, why are you going to travel behind a comet when you're blind? That seems very dangerous and stupid. I've got a list of complaints about this, I'll get to that at the end of the episode. Yeah, the whole plot does seem a little bit ridiculous to me. So Pike sort of works out that he's here to stop a war between the Romulans and the Federation, and he thinks Kirk's the one that might start it once he shows up in the Farragut. And all the Farragut stuff, I mean, I think this is pretty much from that photo that was released of Kirk. I think it was in March before Strange New Worlds aired. But yeah, this is a scene from that. And I get they're trying to keep, they've got a new actor in and they're bringing in Captain Kirk, but it looked like 90% of the bridge stuff on the Farragut, he's there on his own. There's only a couple of quick frames and cuts where you see other crew members. But speaking of ships, man, do the Romulan ships look good. Redoing the episode, let's say, is questionable, but the effects here are what I wanted. Again, you're not going to get this in any remastered or Blu-ray or 4K edition of the TOS ones. I liked when they done it in a Mirror Darkly with the Constitution class as well, because it's sort of fulfilling all those little fantasies and stories that we have in our head. So again, if you don't like it, I understand, but I really liked it. But Kirk comes up with a plan to save the day, and he brings in a whole bunch of automated mining ships. Now, again, this is where logic flies out the window. He does reason that the Romulans don't know what Federation ships look like, but also wouldn't they just scan them and detect that there's no life signs on board? There's a few logic problems in this episode, and surprisingly, almost none of it has to do with time travel. So we do get more questions and answered in some department. For example, what happened to number one? Again, they got rid of her as soon as they could in the episode, so I guess that they ran out of ideas for her. and the two fleets go at it, and because the Enterprise is the only sort of real Starfleet ship there, it gets pretty heavily battered. And I like the whole aftermath of this scene, the way it was shot, again, the use of the music. When Pike's walking through sickbay, we see the wife or the bride from earlier on in the ceremony on the bio bed, and Spock also has been pretty heavily injured as well. And the effects on Spock here, I mean, I don't know what's CGI and what's practical because it looks great. So what Pike learns once Admiral Pike shows back up is that the Romulan War is still going on decades later, and that he's sort of seen all the variations of time. He's done a Doctor Strange in Infinity War, and he's realised how important Spock is, because every time this Pike has tried to change time, it's Spock that's paid the price. So he's trying to convince his younger self to just play along with the original future as it should have been. But yeah, this is weird. So I thought this was going to be a much larger arc, so is this Pike just accepting his fate? Or is this episode setting up Kirk in a TOS reboot? I really can't decide, because this is such... It's a good episode, but the way that they're plotting and setting things up, I don't know where it's going. So, I mean, if Pike's accepting his fate, he's going to have to stay in Starfleet till Kirk takes over. But we know that we're getting Kirk next season. So yeah, what is going on here? There's a lot of pieces in motion, and where does he fit in? Will Jim Kirk be a regular in season 2? But we also do get a nod to Scotty as well. We don't see a face, but we get a voice. So yeah, I think the new engineer in season 2 is probably going to be Montgomery Scott. And whoever it was that they got to do the accent, it's the best Scotty accent since James Doohan. If you aren't aware, I'm Scottish, so I know what I'm talking about in that department, trust me, and also leave a like as well. But so, yeah, the end of the episode, everything's back to where it should be, but number 1 gets arrested when our genetic identity gets exposed, and I knew we were probably going to get a cliffhanger like the end of Discovery Season 1 when the Enterprise showed up. But as I've said in most of my reviews, they get rid of number 1 as soon as they can, and they do it twice in this episode. So, yeah, is this the cliffhanger that we wanted or even cared about? I don't think so. And a lot of characters in this show, like Ortegas, Hemmer and number 1, where they've not really known what to do with them. And number 1 is probably the most severe victim of this. It's just like we didn't think to include her in any of the storylines. They get rid of her sometimes 5 minutes into episodes. So, how much am I going to care about a cliffhanger? Not much of it's got to do with her, if I'm being honest. And also, that song that plays out the episode is pretty terrible, man. I don't like when sci-fi shows that are supposed to be set in the future play modern songs. Star Trek's now got a habit of doing this because I've done it a few times on Picard, and yet, for me, it always takes me out of the episode. It feels a little Grey's Anatomy, it feels a little CW, and it feels a little bit cheap and time filler as well. But yeah, all in all, one of the stronger episodes of Strange New Worlds in my opinion. As I said, I didn't know what was going to happen going in, and I really liked it. There's a lot of twists and turns, and there's a lot of things that can be picked apart as well. But as I said, we maybe got a set up for Scotty. We didn't get Sulu or Chekhov, which was a bit of a shame. And it was nice to see that they're adapting the Romulans, and personally I think this is just them trying a soft run up for the Klingons, because we know that they're coming back next season. But yeah, what did you think of those Romulan foreheads? I don't know, if they were in a bit more of a brighter light it might have looked a bit weird to me. But one of the main things that bothers me about this episode is at the end of it, when Pike and Kirk sit down and decide to get to know each other, Pike asks Kirk where he's from. But he knows, because he already knows Sam Kirk, because Sam Kirk's his friend. So yeah, there was a lot of logic problems in this episode, but again, bizarrely, none of it had to do with time travel. If they've wrapped up the Pike story, I'm happy with that. If they continue to drop little bits of it here and there, I'm happy with that as well. I'm going to go back and binge watch all of this season and see how it stands up back to back. So I might do a video on that later on in the week. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and you don't miss it. And if you've made it this far, please leave a like on the video and let me know what you think of the finale below. Did it live up to it? Are you scared of a TOS reboot? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I'm Al. Thanks for watching.